people of England have no constitution. They have no definition of what the due process of law is. They have no definition of what the rights are they do or do not have, of what the responsibilities are that people in power do or do not have, whether that be the police, Parliament, the king or queen, himself or herself. When you look back at the 4 years in which the whole world was terrified by the dominion of Donald Trump, what do you think the moral of the story is? When you look back at the 8 years in which we were all terrified of George W. Bush, and we all sat in astonishment at one press conference after the next in which he said something that was just mind-blowingly stupid. I think the moral of the story is that you should not allow yourself to be ruled by people you have no intellectual respect for. I want to say with all due seriousness to the people of England, if you have no intellectual respect for Prince Charles, do not allow him to become King Charles. When you look back on all the obscene failures of the British government in the last 50 years, whether you think of those as human rights failures or failures of democracy, when you look back at what happened to the Chamorro people, the Chagos Islanders, when you look back on one case after another of unspeakable police brutality, the inquests and inquiries that went nowhere, the questions about extraordinary rendition, torture, freedom of the press, the Serious Crimes and Policing Act, the definition of harassment that is so broad that anyone who says to another person that they ought not to do something they want to do or that they ought to do something they don't want to do, anything can be defined as harassment and you can be put in prison for it in the United Kingdom. Sending the same email to someone twice can qualify as harassment and you can be put in prison for it. And these laws really have consequences within the United Kingdom. When you look back over the last 50 years of what the Queen reigned over, of what the problems were that she alone had the power to solve, when you look back on the unanswered ethical questions of the whole Tony Blair period, questions that included kidnapping, torture, very simple question of in a democracy, does one man have the power unilaterally to bring the nation into a war that goes on approximately forever? There's no democratic process, no referendum, no voting, no debate for you to participate in. All the questions that people cared about so passionately while Tony Blair was in power, and then strangely that they seem to forget about as soon as Tony Blair left power. Do none of you have a memory long enough to place some of the blame for this on the institution of the monarchy itself? Do not allow yourself to be ruled by people you have no intellectual respect for, whether on the smallest scale or the largest. Some of you are doing volunteer work with a charity where you don't respect the people in charge. And you don't know how they got in charge because you didn't elect them. You don't know who did. Some of you are working a job where you have a boss you have no respect for. Some of you have a family or a circle of friends. Whatever the case may be. If you were going to serve somebody, if you were going to obey somebody, make sure it's someone you have intellectual respect for. And if not, do whatever it takes to either extricate yourself from that situation or overturn the whole structure of authority that does, in this narrow sense, oppress you. What if Prince Charles is to be the last monarch in the history of England? What if this is to be the last generation in which the people of England are ruled without a written constitution, in a very real sense, without human rights, without explicitly defined rule of law? Democracy begins when your excuses, your compromises come to an end.